Shana, everyone. Welcome to the Aramaic teachings. We're going to continue where we left off last Wednesday. But before we do, I'm going to say the opening declaration and prayer in Aramaic. Al Haile Maran Ishua Mishicha Misharenan Milap Milte the Maria Lacha Haya. All right. I promised you something last week because we're starting now the third vision in the book of the Revelation. The Giliana. In Aramaic, we call it Giliana. What we say in Aramaic is Katawe Giliana, which means the book of the unveiling. The unveiling is what it means. And so this is the third vision, and this third vision starts with the second verse of the 8th chapter. That's where we left off, because the last seal was broken, and this very last seal brought in the 7 trumpets. And that's what we left with on verse 2. Then I saw 7 messengers, chapter 8, verse 2. I saw 7 messengers and stood at the altar, and he had a golden censer, and an abundant incense was given to him that he might offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar. This is when he had broken the 7th seal. And it released 7 messengers stood before God in verse 1 with 7 trumpets. Now, I promised you last week, let me put the Bible aside here, that I would bring the type of trumpets that they were thinking about. This is Near Eastern, this is Jewish. So this is what they call the trumpet. So I brought it so you could see it. This is an ancient shofar, the trumpet. This is where you blow in, right here. Let me take it out of the stand I have it in. And when they blow with it like this, you see the trumpet end is up. When they've been in a war or fighting, and then they blow in it. But let me tell you, it's very difficult blowing in this trumpet. This is what they had. But most of us, when we get biblical pictures and stuff like that, we see the brass long trumpet with the big brass ending at the end, or a white cup to show that this is a trumpet. No, that was definitely Roman. This is of the Near East, and it has to do with what you call the Middle East. This has to do with the Israelite people, and most of the early followers of Jesus were Jewish. They belonged to the religious faith of Judaism, but they were from the different tribes of Israel that had come down and was worshiping at that time. And this is the trumpet. When this end was up and they were blowing it, it means victory. If they blew it this way, which they can, that means that they lost the battle. They were defeated. And you'll find that it became an idiom in the Aramaic text and the way of speaking. It's in the Bible, it's in Hebrew and it's in Aramaic. When it talks about having an exalted horn. An exalted horn means victory. A horn that is turned down and blowing, it means defeat. You're depressed. These are all idiomatic expressions in the scriptures, but you have to be familiar with the background of the people. So when it talks about the 7 trumpets, that's what you have to picture. And when you see angels flying in the air, does it mean that they have wings? Not necessarily. That's why I always translate it as messengers. Messengers. And some messengers had 4 wings, some had 6 wings. It depends on whether you're a seraphim, cherubim, or the ones carrying the throne of God, which you'll find in Ezekiel. So they generally had 4, 2, or 6 wings. And it represented that the thoughts of God and the words of God and the messages of God were universal, getting to everyone all over the earth. That's why they needed wings to travel. But sometimes when they appeared, they didn't have wings. But we always see angels in a typical Scandinavian style. When we see angels here in the West, if you were to give this to a Near Easterner and you talk about an angel, they don't see the way we see angels, because we picture them more Scandinavian. That is, very fair, complexion, and blue eyes and blonde hair. That's not the Near Eastern. Well, you got to go back to the ancient reliefs in Mesopotamia, where you see those men standing straight up and they had wings, and they were guarding things for the king. Those were cherubims. That's what they used. And sometimes they had a face of an eagle or the face of a lion. They preferred eagle because, again, it was flight and speed. So this is, they're talking about the head. This is all Near Eastern imagery. And when you're reading the book of the Revelation, you've got to be familiar with the imagery of the Near East. And there's something else I need to tell you too tonight. I might as well show it all now before we actually break down the scriptures. And that is, years ago in this 1960s, when I began to investigate and search out all kinds of things on scripture. I always did that. And in Greek editions, everything I could. But Hebrew, anything like that. And that's when I was introduced to Dr. Lamza and the Aramaic, which is a story all by itself. But then I started lecturing on it all over the state of Texas. And one of the biggest problems I had sometimes when I was in Methodist churches or Episcopal churches, because I was always allowed to come in there and speak and talk about the Aramaic. I had no books to show them. Everyone thinks, well, if you're a scholar, you got to have a great bibliography, which I do. I have over 3,000 books here in my office here. But at that time in the early 60s, I couldn't find anything much on Aramaic. Everything now is coming to light again. Between 1850 and 1918 and all that, they started investigating Aramaic, and they did publish books, but they were all out of print, everything. I couldn't get my hands on anything. And I used to ask Dr. Lamza, what am I going to do? He said, I will teach you. He taught me the history of the Church of the East. He taught me what happened to it when it went down, and its history. And I recommend that book that is available on that now. It wasn't available when I got it. All of my learning was from Dr. Lamza, and he taught me the history of the Church of the East and what it suffered and what it went through, but also how it spread clear into Asia, how it spread into China, and some into Japan, and even with Genghis Khan and all of them. The Mongols really accepted Christianity. And when they came down to invade the Near East, they went after the Jewish people, they went after the Muslim people. This is what they did in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. That's what they did because Christianity had reached them, the Near Eastern style of Christianity, and not too heavy on the Roman Greek style, but the Near Eastern. So, but I had nothing on that. Now I want to show you these things that are available now. Here is something very interesting. It's called the Church of the East. I wish I had it during those days. Say, hey, look, I can back it up because people want bibliographies. You got to have proof. So at that time, this was just published, I think, and it was done in California, and it was in 2002 or 3, I think it was, when this was done. 2007. Mar Bawai Soro. And it's all about the Church of the East, their beliefs, and all the martyrs and Abrahat, and all the different, the rise of the patriarch, ordinations and the Eucharist, all these different things that happened to the church and their early beliefs. They have wonderful maps and pictures in this. This was, you couldn't get anything like this when I began. People had to take my word for it. And they did that with Dr. Lamza too. And this is from the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome, in English. Then, now this was an old one, because there was a British scholar who believed in the Near Eastern stuff, and his book called Early Christianity Outside the Roman Empire. This is a good little book. Then one of my favorites is Saint Ephrem, Healing in the Theology of Saint Ephrem, Aramaic-speaking church father, Saint Ephrem. And he wrote everything in poetry, all his commentaries. But you see, it's a mixture of Aramaic and English, so I don't recommend you getting it. But here's something really wonderful. When I talked about it, this wasn't available. J.B. Siegel, Edessa, the blessed city. This city was the first really spiritual, universal Aramaic school in Turkey. And you can visit it today, but of course all the ruins and the ancient thing is in ruins. But the city is still there. You can, if you have someone who is venturesome, would take you into that city, a tour guide into that city of Edessa. It's not called Edessa today, it's called Urfa. But this was wonderful. And the pictures, and they have in here of the city. I have a lot of that in here. And this, and by the way, this one, the Aramaic origin of the fourth gospel, Dr. Burney, another British scholar. Aramaic origin of the fourth gospel. He goes into detail how all the sayings, you have to see it, all the sayings, everything were done in Aramaic, not Greek. It went from Aramaic to Greek. And one last book, this, The Church of the East. Again, but this is its history. That other one I showed you with the Church of the East has to do more with what took place with inside the church, the patriarchs, their teachings, their background, all of that. But here's now a whole, just think of this beautiful volume, Church of the East. And the first time I mentioned it, I was still pastoring in San Antonio at Calvary Missionary Church, but lecturing on Aramaic, going all over to different places. And a Jewish man who had a special program, radio program called the Jewish Christian Hour. And he invited me to come speak there. And I mentioned the Church of the East. And at that time, SMU, you know, was one of the students who was a senior and graduating. He challenged what I had to say about the Church of the East, and then wrote a dissertation on the falsity of what I was speaking on in Aramaic. Everything was Greek, not Aramaic. And then he said, and the Church of the East, there's no such thing as a Church of the East. And then they put him on TV, a big TV, and a scholarly one. And he said that Dr. Lamza was grandiose when he called his church the Church of the East. Well, I guess this man here is also another grandiose man. It's called the Church of the East. But there's luckily, though, there's another book I didn't bring down. I just wanted to show you these. Professor Hitti of Princeton University in New Jersey, he had a whole book about the Church of the East. He's no longer with us now. And the book I had, he had already left the university, but he had many publications on the Arab world and especially on the Church of the East. And I have that book right over here too in my library. But it took me, I really had a hard time getting a hold of it too. So I just wanted to show you folks, because when you mention Aramaic, people go nuts. They just say, oh, well, what are you talking about? Everything was done in Greek. Yeah, even Jesus spoke Greek and everyone there spoke Greek. The common people spoke Aramaic. That was the major language in Israel during the time of Jesus. Aramaic was the tongue. And on the cross, when it says in Hebrew, because the Hebrew letters are Aramaic letters. So they thought it was Hebrew, but it was Aramaic. And even Eusebius, who's the one who wrote the first writings on the church history that we have, he talks about it in Aramaic, but doesn't go into detail because he was more of following the Roman church at the time, Eusebius. So I just wanted to show you that. So what I'm teaching you is very, very old. Okay? All right, let's get to it. Chapter 8 and the 7 trumpets. Now you know what the trumpet looks like. And you can see the messenger blowing into it now that you see the type of trumpet they had. And I read you the 3rd verse, the 4th verse. Well, let me explain the 3rd verse. And another messenger came and stood at the altar, and he had a golden censer. You know, censers where you put incense in it, and you do this with it. You know, make it fill the whole place with, because remember, they're in the temple in heaven. This is all a vision. There is no temple in heaven. None of this exists in heaven. But this is the Near Eastern imagery. So this is what he's seeing. It fits the culture of the people. So, and abundant incense was given to him that he might offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar. The golden altar here was an altar that was square, and it stood square like this. From here, square, and it had incense in it, but we also had another one that you shake like this, and it fills the place. But that they had in the temple. It's a square altar where it had nothing but incense, and it was very deep and for the burning of the incense. Let me tell you, they still do it today. In the Church of the East, which I was in the Church of the East in Arizona, and on the east side of Phoenix, where they had, but it wasn't Phoenix itself. I forgot the name of the city they're in, but I was in there. They had me sit on the front row. I won't do that again. They had me sit there because they were going to honor me and mention me from the pulpit. Everything's said in Aramaic. Everything you see, the curtains, they have a curtain there, and they pull it back with some of the imagery that you even see in the book of the Revelation. And I sat there, but they had so much incense. It filled the entire stage that everything was being done. The altar, all that there, filled it, and also half the church. And of course, you could smell it clear into the narthex of the church and what we would call the lobby. And it was so strong, my eyes were tearing. It was really strong. So I can imagine what it was like when he was seeing this with the messenger sending all this whole censer and all of this, and the heavy incense and the cloud. It creates a cloud like a fog, and the smell is very, very strong. Burns your eyes, burns your nose too. So, and it's not like in the Roman Catholic Church where they just do it up there on the altar and just a little bit and they swing it. in the Church of the East, it's strong. So he says, it was with the prayers of all the set apart ones. Saints means the set apart ones. Upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. Wow, that was even before the throne in his vision. And the smoke of the incense, which came with prayers of the saints, ascended before God out of the angels or the messenger's hand. 5. And the messenger took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it upon the earth. And there were voices. The word voices there means noises. Noises, really, it should be. There was noises, thunderings, lightnings, earthquake. Something terrible was happening on the earth. And the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound, because now that the incense is done, the prayers, in other words, what the saints had suffered and the prayers they had for help and all that, now something was going to happen. Now the trumpets were going to blow. And the 7 messengers who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first messenger sounded, and there followed. As soon as he sounded, we have hail, fire, mingled with water. Now, in King James Version, it says mingled with blood. No. It's water. Maya. So hail and fire. Why? Because the fire melted the hail, which created the water, which means it was a terrible, terrible storm, sending hail, and also lightning, which created the fire. And it says, and they were poured upon the land, or the earth. And a third part of the earth was burned up. The land was burned up. And a third part of the trees, they were burned up. And all the green grass was burned up. Now, what I have to tell you now, it's going to get more and more and more gruesome as we're reading. The 7 seals are through now. And because the 7th seal was broken, these trumpets are being released. What it is one catastrophe, one war after another after another. And when people try to specify it in their day and in their time to certain things that are happening today, let me tell you, folks, it's already happened, and it will always happen, and it will continue to happen. All this stuff will continue to happen until the day that humanity wakes up and discovers their true spiritual nature and governs the earth and governs their nations and governs the people from a spiritual principles and insight, compassion and love and understanding and mercy. All of that, all the principles that Jesus taught, they don't necessarily have to be quote, quote, Christians, but carrying the ideas that Jesus had when we discover our true sense of spirituality. Jesus had it. He knew it. And he spoke, and the Jewish people grasped it right away. And I say Jewish people, but those of the Jewish faith. And so it still always be storms and thunders and lightnings and things. These are all figures of speech, meaning trouble, wearing you out. Because humanity does not follow the basic principles. I'm speaking overall, not everyone. I'm not trying to individualize anyone or any country, anything like that. But until humanity as a whole recognizes this, recognizes their true origin and their true being, we're going to have the 4 horsemen that are going to be riding all the time. We're going to have all this other earthquakes and all these other things. And there's a spiritual meaning to it too, when it talks about the trees were burned up. Trees are also symbolic. It depends on the setting. That the trees would be burned up, meaning that there would be such a purging. Now, this is a spiritual meaning to it now. The purging would be so strong that it would get to the roots of trees, meaning the root thinking that people have has to do with their thoughts that's rooted, that goes underground. It'll burn up the tree and clear to the roots, meaning a purging of deep thoughts that are not in union with the spiritual understanding and principles. And the grass simply means surface thinking instead of the hidden, rooted thinking, which the trees represented. And this is the other meaning of it. Okay. Then the second messenger sounded, and it was, and as it were, a great mountain aflame with fire. Now, in other words, it saw this huge fire, but it says like a mountain, you see, as if it were a great mountain. Mountain means an immense fire. An immense fire, when it says, that's what you got to picture when you see this imagery here. An immense fire. That's all the term, like a mountain means an immense fire, okay? And it was cast into the sea. Remember, the other was cast on the land. The first trumpet sound made things happen on the land. Now this fiery thing, which just it means destruction, huge. It's going into the sea, and that means it's going to get ships. It's going to get islands. It's going to get, in other words, no one's going to escape this kind of destruction. That's all it's saying here. All right. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Of course, the islands too. Now the third messenger sounded, and there fell a star from heaven, which means some prominent leader, king, potentate, a prominent king, leader, potentate, loses his power. Well, of course, all of this was interpreted that this was going to happen to Rome, just because that's what he was aiming at. John was aiming at that here. But of course, people use it for everything today, which is ridiculous. And there'll always be fire and hail and danger on the sea. Ships get blown up, submarines get blown up today. All this happens because man doesn't get along with other people. One nation doesn't get along with another nation, so they attack on the sea. We now attack in the air, attack on the sea, and attack on the earth. We do everything. This is all it's talking about. And that will continue. It will continue until, this is why I don't like to read the book of the Revelation. I don't need to read this to know what's going on. My purpose is to awaken people to their spiritual energies, their understanding, so that they can, in other words, get the seal of God in the midst of all of this, which we read last week, okay? A star fell from, and heaven there means from the sky, means someone prominent. Burning as though it was a lamp, and it fell upon a third of the rivers. The rivers, and upon the fountains of water. And the name of this star is wormwood, meaning the fall of this particular leader brings bitterness. And it polluted, this bitterness polluted the rivers, and this is where they got their drinking from the rivers and the fountains. That's where they got their water from to drink. It becomes bitter, which means life will now turn bitter. That's all that means there. Now you can apply it to anything you want. That's up to you. I don't do that in the book of the Revelation. I'm just explaining the imagery here and why we have this imagery. Okay. And so it brought bitterness in the rivers and the fountains, because the name of the star that fell, which was like a burning flame, and where it fell in the waters, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, which is bitter. That's what wormwood is, bitter. You can get wormwood, to help kill parasites in the intestines. So, and many men died from the waters. Now, the reason why the rivers and fountains means the teachings were bitter. The teachings were false and bitter and hurt them. They died from it. They suffered in their souls because they were made bitter. And the fourth messenger sounded, and the third part of the sun eclipsed, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. This is poetic writing in the Near East. When all this tragedy is taking place, what is the earth composed of? Land and sea. Land and sea. And you saw what happened. The three angels sounded, and the land and the sea got it. And then finally the drinking water and life itself became bitter, and the teachings became bitter, the fountains and the rivers. Life became bitter. Okay. And now with the 12th verse, this is typical poetry because of all the suffering on the land and the sea. It says, and the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was eclipsed. Which means, when it says that, another way I can say this in Aramaic is not just eclipsed. I could say a third part of the sun wore sackcloth, eclipsing it. This is all figurative speech, and it's all imagery. Imagery. A third part of the sun eclipsed, and a third part of the moon. So the moon was wearing sackcloth too. And the third part of the stars. No, in other words, we depend on the sun, the moon, and the stars for light. But they were eclipsed or wearing sackcloth, which means eclipse means they were suffering along with the earth and the sea and the people who were suffering a bitter life. This is typically Near Eastern poetry. And the day was darkened for a third part of it, and the night likewise. What it's borrowing also from is from in Egypt, when everything went dark in Egypt as part of the plagues. So this is what it's doing here. And I beheld and heard an eagle. No, this verse 13 is an interlude again, like a little parenthesis in there. And it says, and I looked, and I heard an eagle. Now, in the King James Version, it says an angel. No. Aramaic text says eagle. And having a tail, and it had a red tail, as it were blood, because the word for blood and the word for red is the same word in Aramaic. Demma, blood, dem for red. Flying through the midst of the sky. He saw this eagle. Didn't see him in the heavens, because the word heaven means sky. Heavens means the universe as well as the sky. Here, it means the sky. He saw this eagle flying in the sky, and it had a red tail, which means bloodshed is coming. Bloodshed is coming now. We're getting ready for something terrible. But this the eagle is speaking. And what is the eagle saying? It's saying, woe, woe, woe. 3 woes. This is all symbolic. It's going, ooh, ooh, Whoo, like that. The eagle is doing it as it's flying with the red tail. Why 3? Because there are 3 more trumpets ready to be sounded. Because we just finished with the 4th trumpeting messenger. Now there is 5, 6, and 7, which is 3. What this little interlude is telling us in this 13th verse, what it's saying to us, get ready. The 3 final trumpets are bloody, very bloody. It's worse than bitterness, worse than just storms, worse than just earthquakes, all these things. What we have now is loss of life. Bloody, it means wars, okay? And because there were 3 more trumpeters to sound. So that's why it has 3 woes. And it was flying in the sky, which means that this is going to be all over. Everywhere is going to be touched by this. And the 5th, now we go to chapter 9, verse 1. And the 5th messenger sounded, and I saw a star fall from the sky upon the land, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. It means someone with power, someone with authority is going to let something loose. Whoa, what? The bottomless pit. The bottomless pit here, you have to understand the Near East again. Sheol, the word Sheol in Hebrew means a bottomless pit where they felt people were put and waited for the judgment day. But he had this particular potentate had the power to this bottomless pit, to Sheol. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit. There arose smoke out of the pit like smoke belching from a great furnace. So in other words, there was fire in that pit, and the smoke was coming in, and it was such a strong, it's like it was belching out this smoke, which means confusion and loss of understanding. That's what all of that means, loss of understanding. When everything's all smoked up and it's belching it from the fire, from the destruction. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. I told you lose understanding. And there came out of the smoke, here's the war. There came out of the smoke locusts. Remember the locusts in the 10 plagues that came, that Moses brought upon the land? And to them was given power, like the scorpions of the earth have power in their tail. In other words, this was an army. This was an army, and it's described as if scorpions were released because they're coming to sting you. This is, again, you have to understand Eastern imagery. And it says, because they came out of the smoke, they came out of what was hidden. They didn't know it was there. But this person who had the key to the bottomless pit has released them because he opened the pit, and out came the smoke, and out came this army. And it says, the scorpions of the earth have power, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their brows. In other words, it would only get to people, into their souls, into their beings, for those who did not have the truth in their heart. They didn't have the teachings, the principles, the way of life. They would be suffering. That's all this is talking about. So, and they were commanded that they should kill them, because the army would kill them, of course, but that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was the torment of a scorpion. They were being stung by this army when it strikes a man. So in those days, men shall seek death. They're so tired of these wars and fighting. When is it going to stop? And in those days, men shall seek death and shall not find it, which means they keep on living in the midst of horror rather than just dying. It doesn't mean God's going to stop death. I've heard preachers talk on this very verse, and I heard them say, God's going to make death flee. They're taking it literally. This is Near Eastern speech. This is Near Eastern speech. Death fleeing. They were right when they said death would flee, but they're taking it literally. That death would no longer happen because they got to stay alive for all this. It means that their torment, that the war is so bad, it didn't kill them. It just damaged them. They lost limbs. They did, and they still keep living. And haven't we seen that? Haven't we seen that? So tormented means to lose a certain part of your body. Tormented. That's why you're not killed, but you lose something in your body. And this is Eastern way of speaking. And it says, and the shapes of the locusts, well, they shall seek death and desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Didn't mean God stopped death at all. It meant they had to live through torment, wishing they could die, but didn't. And the shapes of the locusts, now this is all imagery, symbolic, don't take it literally. So the shapes of the locusts were like horses, which means a good army. In other words, these locusts had the shape of horses. Don't you get what that means? It means an army, horses, because they came on horses to fight. They had swords, they had bows and arrows, they had all of that. Spears, everything. But they were on horses because it was an army. That's why the locusts had the shape of horses. Prepared for battle. And on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold. Like gold. It means they had helmets and stuff on their heads, and it shimmered, shined like gold because the light hitting it made it look like gold when they brought this war and fighting. That's what happens. That's the crowns of gold. And their faces were the faces of men. Now, can you imagine the locusts? First, they're in the shape of a horse. Then they have a crown on their head that forecast and looked like gold. And now they had faces like men, which means they were guided by intelligence officers. Faces of men means a strategic war, a strategic fighting. That's why it's faces of men. And their hair, they had hair like the hair of women. Oh, what? All these men had long hair like that of a woman? What does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is beauty, dignity, order. Beauty, dignity, order. That's why the hair like woman. This is describing the type of army or the type of battle this would be. It would be a battle of everything is straightforward in it. It's guided by intellect, faces of men. It's guided, and they had the horses. They were properly dressed for the fight. They had all the helmets and everything to protect themselves, and the shimmering protections that they had. A shield also would make it appear that way. And that's why it's described like this. And their teeth were like the teeth of lions. Teeth like the teeth of lions. To have teeth like Lions means ready to devour, and devour you it will. Tear you apart. That's why I said the teeth, because that's what you chew on. That's what the animals on, like a lion jumping on its prey. It rips it to pieces. It goes for the inner organs, because they just don't eat the flesh. They also eat the inner organs. They eat the thing of the animal. So this army will devour the people and the livestock and everything. This is a terrible one. And they had breastplates. Yeah, there it is again. As though breastplates of iron to protect themselves. They were not literally locusts. It's describing an army. And the sound of their wings were like the sounds of chariots, of many horses running to battle, meaning it was extremely noisome and loud and scary, to put fear in all those who saw and heard this army coming. And they had tails like scorpions, which means after they go, the main ones go through, the final scorpion strike comes in the army. And they had a king over them, who was the messenger of the bottomless pit. So you know that this was someone who had planned a war strategy. That's why he opened the bottomless pit and all the army came out. And whose name was Abado, but in Greek, Apollyon, which means, this name means destruction, death and destruction. That was the first woe. It is past. And look, 2 more woes are coming. And the 6th messenger sounded, and I heard a voice from the horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to that 6th messenger, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 messengers which are bound in the great river Euphrates. It's telling us where this is going to take place. There are 4 angels or messengers in the river Euphrates, and they're to go there. Just talking about this army here. And what I will do, because I need to get to your questions, what I will do next week is go into, because really the 5th messenger on the trumpet and the 6th belong together. And I'll explain that. I will tell you what this is describing, what it is describing. And there'll always be these kinds of wars, as I said, until humanity wakes up and governments wakes up, because people in government are human beings. What forms of government? I don't care, any kind of government. What forms it are human beings. And as long as they abide by certain rules that keep us apart from one another, of caring for one another, one nation caring for one another, all of that, there'll always be these wars and different things that are going on. And it will continue until man comes to, when I say man, I mean humanity, comes to the awakening, the full awakening. I don't know how much suffering it's going to take for humanity. And every generation seems to have to learn it all over again, all over. They don't seem to grasp what the last generation went through. So it's like they have to go through it. But this is why we have different ones appearing from time to time, real spiritual people, to awaken us to the inner sense of the true sense of our being. We will continue with that, with the 6th trumpet tier, with the 6th trumpeter, as he sounds, and we'll read it, and then I'll explain all more of 5, which I did in detail, explain a lot in 5, but 6 actually tells what army it is, okay? Because they're in cahoots. And notice it's by the river Euphrates. Remember, in ancient Mesopotamia, the river Euphrates and the river Tigris. So that means the Euphrates is the boundary line between the western side and the eastern side. So this means it's going to be from the east. In other words, the army's going to come this way. Whoop, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I will explain that next week. I have to go to your questions right now. So let me see the chat. Okay. Let's see what the questions are. Can you show the books again? Okay, I'll do it at the very end. What is the Aramaic commentary? What is the Aramaic commentary? God punished. God punished? I don't understand this question. Oh, tells Moses that he can enter the promised land because he did not speak. He did not, what? Just a minute. He did not, he, as God instructed, but struck the rock to get the water. Numbers 20:11. Thank you, Robbie. Okay. What it means when it says that Moses struck the rock, in other words, he went hunting for it. Before, he was guided to put it in exactly to do it. This way, it made him look weak. And God really didn't punish Moses. Moses could no longer take care of the people. If I were teaching you the book of Exodus, I would explain all that to you. But what he did then, he made himself look weak as a ruler, as if he was no longer being guided by God. People were beginning to turn on Moses. That's why Moses had to prepare Joshua. But saying that he couldn't enter the land of Canaan because he did that, that is the writer saying that. God didn't say, oh, you disobeyed me and you didn't know, because Moses was getting fed up. He was tired. There's several times he was arguing with God in his dreams and in his visions. I'm tired of these people. I'm tired of them. They're always against me. They don't want to do what I'm telling them to do. Da, 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 da. And it goes on. And so Moses was losing his sensitivity to guidance, is what was happening. And he could no longer find the hidden well. That's why he was striking the sand and not getting the hidden well. Because before, when he did it and struck the rock, they discovered the well. And that's why they were singing, spring up, O well, spring up, O well. You have to be, again, familiar with the way Near Eastern people talk and what they did in those days. And I understand you're wondering about that. So that's the answer to it. He was losing his sensitivity to divine guidance. So a new leader had to be given, and that was telling him he had to get ready to prepare Joshua to do it. Okay. All right. Good evening. In your understanding, in quick words, what was the book of Revelation written and inserted in the Bible? Well, it wasn't accepted until the 4th century. Not until the 4th century. Really hard to understand because there is lots of different transactions about the Revelation. Yeah, I should say so. There's so many different ideas. I'm just getting it simply and giving it to you from the Aramaic point of view and unveiling Near Eastern imagery, or you would say Middle Eastern, okay? Can you show the original trumpet again? Okay. This is the shofar. Can you all see it? Because I'm reading here it is. And they blew it this way. This is it. This is the horn. It's a horn from an animal. So that's the trumpet. The Near Eastern trumpet, not the Roman one. Okay. And let's see. Bless you, Doctor. Your words of wisdom are the prophecy the generation needs to hear. Thank you. What version of scriptures are you using? I'm using Dr. Lambs's translation of the Bible from Aramaic, because I have it covered in leather, but I have it here. This right here. Can you see it? The Holy Bible. Lamb's translation. That's my mentor. It's his translation. And right now, you can't get it. Doubleday hasn't reprinted it yet, and I don't know when they're going to do it. All right. God does not sending earthly catastrophe, floods, earthquakes, etc. How do we humanly create this upheaval? No, it's nature that does that. Nature. And what the writer's doing, he's using imagery of earthquakes and all this kind of things to show that we suffer from that. That's all he's saying. And he's just using and showing that calamities and different things come upon us, but we're the ones that are open to it. Like people sometimes, villages, they will build a whole village right at the foot of a volcano. It's going to erupt someday. In Guatemala, I was in Guatemala, and I was trying to catch up with my Spanish again, and I was there for 2 weeks. And I was in a town, I forgot the name of the town right now, but there were 2 volcanoes, one in the north and one in the south, right there. And the village is right between the 2 volcanoes. You see them, and sometimes they were smoking. And I was in there taking lessons in Spanish when I was there. I was there for 3 or 4 weeks. So people do all the times, but sometimes when we fool with nature, sometimes when we dig into things, taking all kinds of things and messing the earth, we can bring on some things like that. But God not punishing us. That's where. Thank you, Dr. Rocco. Okay. Last Sunday I was watching Super Soul Sunday, where Oprah Winfrey interviews various spiritual teachers. Richard Rohr, a Franciscan priest, was discussing the book, The Universal Christ. He's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The book speaks about meaning of Christ and that it wasn't Jesus' last name. Well, what's new about that? I've been teaching that for years. He also referenced the story of Jacob sleeping on an anointed rock and the angels ascending and descending on ladders. It wasn't on ladders, it was stairs. I was disappointed that he seemed to be unaware of the Aramaic culture. I know, probably was. And his interpretations, unfortunately, wait a minute. I was disappointed he seemed to be unaware of the Aramaic culture and his interpretations. Unfortunately, his theological teachings, but he has a right to them. I mean, that's what he learned when he was in seminary. What else could you expect? Are you familiar with Richard? No, I'm not. I vote for you to be interview on Super Soul Sunday. I didn't know that was available. Okay, thank you. I have ordered a Lambda Bible from cbd.com, and hopefully I'll get it in September. I cannot see the chat. Wonder why. Okay. What is the English translation what is the English translation of your opening prayer? It's a declaration and a prayer. When I say Al-Haile. Al-Haile means upon or with the energy and power. But it's really the way it's Haile with his. It's actually I'm saying with his energy, upon and with his energy. Whose energy? The modern of our Lord, Yeshua. That's his name, Jesus. Yeshua. Our Lord Mashiach, which is the anointed, our Lord Jesus, the anointed. or the Messiah. Misharenan, which means we begin, all of us together. Milap, to learn, to study, to open up to. Milte, milte means his word. Whose word? The Maria Allah, the Lord God, or Lord, the Lord God, Lord Yahweh, the living Lord God is what I say at the very end. But when I say it in Aramaic, it's reversed. The Maria Allah Haya means literally the Lord God living, but in English we have to say the living Lord God. Huh? That's what I'm saying when I open up that prayer. It's a declaration and a prayer at the same time. All right. I think that's it. I don't see any more on here. All right. Before I close, don't forget the Aramaic School of Light starts in September 10th. It's only one Saturday a month. And I'm doing it on Yeshua, Jesus. Bre Danasha, Bre Dalacha. What does that mean? All right. Yeshua is how you say Jesus in Aramaic. Yeshua. And that's the full. The Assyrian people just say Ishu. They don't pronounce the at the end. Yeshua. They just say Ishu. And it means Jesus. Our word Jesus comes from the Greek. And when I say Bre Danasha means son of man, but that's literal. I didn't really translate it. That's literal. Bre Danasha means son of man. And the next one, Bre Dalaha, means son of God. So I'm doing a special seminar, a 3-part seminar on the boyhood of Jesus, his education, who were his teachers, how did he know, and when did he know he was the anointed? When did that fully dawn on him? What did he do in his early life? What happened between 12 and 30? I'm going to go into all that on detail. I will go into what he did as a little boy, what he did when he got his bar mitzvah, and also when he went all through to age 30. What was he doing? I'm going to go in detail. This is going to be in 3 parts, and it'll be in September, October, November. And the first one is going to be Saturday from 1 to 3 Eastern time, and it's called the Aramaic School of Light. Contact the foundation for more details. Those of you who are members of the foundation, you'll get it in the publication that we put out every 4 months, where we're continuing the life story of Jesus done by Dr. Lamza, which is out of print. And I have the original, the ones, and I put things in there that Doubleday threw out. I put them back in and redid it. So that's in the publication that we put out 3 times a year. So and the ad for the Aramaic School of Light is in there. Okay, that terminates for tonight, and I will probably see most of you next week, where we'll continue with this revelation. I hope you're getting something out of it. It's very, very difficult book. I really don't like to teach on it, not because of its difficulty, but because it's so, the way people interpret it, and it's so negative. We've got to just get to the root. That's why I even rather teach Paul than I do the book of the Revelation. Jesus teaching, and also I love teaching what we call the Old Testament. They don't call their Bible the Old Testament. Jewish people don't call it Old Testament. And that's a name that we gave those books, Old Testament, and because of the New Testament. But there's only one Testament, and that's our union and communion with God. Okay. All right. Oh, one more thing you asked. I'll close with this. All right. Here are those books to show it again. That this is the Church of the East. It's got a wonderful maps and pictures. And oh, here. Yeah, I love the opening in here. Here it shows you the where the church spread. The Eastern Church spread, and where it set up all its different churches and what they call sees, and it shows you Edessa, all of that in here. This is the Silk Road. This is all the Silk Road. And this is a wonderful book. I wish I had it when I was first lecturing on it. These things didn't even exist. But now, because of the interest in Aramaic, and more people are doing Aramaic, and some of them, but they don't have the knowledge that Dr. Lambda had. He was brought up in Mesopotamia and near Edessa and these places. And he kept the old customs going. That's why we have so much light. Okay. And this you can't get. This book is hard to get. The Aramaic Origin of the Fourth Gospel by Dr. Burney. He goes into detail. It's just to prove that everything was done in Aramaic and not Greek. And he has Aramaic all in here. And this is the story of Urfa, or the Edessa. The first school of Aramaic was done there. It was a big school. Today it's in Turkey, and it's called Urfa. But it is Edessa, the blessed city Edessa. That's where really the Eastern Christianity grew and then went into the Silk Road. And this is Healing in the Theology of Saint Ephraim, how he practiced it. And it's a mixture of Aramaic and English in here. So you have to really know Aramaic to get most of what you want in here. And this is done by a priest in Northern California, and it's the Church of the East. It tells you all about what they did and some of their teachings and their background, and how they broke from the other Eastern Church. It broke in two. The Assyrians and Chaldeans split. The Chaldeans went into the Roman Catholic, and the Assyrians stayed with the Church of the East. And it has Aprahat and all their teachings, the apostolic primacy between all of these places that are mentioned. You really have to be interested in history to get these books. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful being with you this evening. I love you, bless you, stay well, sleep well, and have a wonderful rest of the week.